when we talk about education, kind of we're looking at it in a vacuum. We're talking about the struggles that low-income kids are having, and that's true. But Mrs. McMahon, you are also aware that in America we have more income and wealth inequality than we've ever had before. You are aware that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. You are aware, I suspect, that teachers are dealing with kids who are literally homeless, kids who come from dysfunctional families where there is violence. Does it concern you in America that we are living in a society where the people on top are doing phenomenally well, while 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck? And how do you think that impacts our educational system?
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. First of all, let me say that I believe that teaching is one of the most noble professions that we have in our country, and we have so many good, dedicated teachers to help our students. I do think that we are trapping students often in low-performing schools, and that's why the president has such a strong policy towards school choice.
But you will agree, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you will agree that you can't just look at education. The truth is that middle class, upper middle class public schools in America generally do pretty well. But if you are homeless, if you were a homeless person and you had kids, the odds of your kids doing pretty well, and I'm just asking you, what do you think about the massive level of income and wealth inequality, the fact that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty? Is that something you think you might want to pay attention to?
Well, certainly, Senator, I do believe that we want to make sure that every child in our country has the opportunity to have equal access to a quality education. And the Department of Education really is not setting economic policy in the country. Well, we should focus on educating our children, and we should focus on it at the local level.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned correctly that we have many great teachers in America, right?
Yes.
If you as a businesswoman wanted to attract the best and the brightest, would you be starting them off after they leave school, maybe $50,000, $60,000 in debt with salaries of $35,000 or $40,000? Or would you say, we respect, you talked about teaching being the noblest profession. I agree with you. Would you agree with me, support my legislation that says no teacher in America should earn at least $60,000 a year?
Well, certainly the pay to teachers is up to the states where those teachers reside. I do believe we should pay our teachers fairly. They spend so much time with our students, and they should be well compensated for their job.
Paying them fairly, nobody in the world will disagree with you. I mean, the question is, if teaching is a noble profession, if teaching is an important profession, you know, should we be paying them salaries commensurate with the value that of the work that they are doing? So I'm asking you a simple question. Would you recommend to states, as the leader of education in America, that teachers at least make $60,000 a year?
I would certainly recommend to states that teachers be paid what is commensurate with the kinds of jobs that are part of their states. Not all states have the same living costs. Not all states have the same ability to pay teachers. But to attract really good teachers and to keep them, we should definitely pay them commensurate with the job performance that they are undertaking.
Millions of young people, low-income people, are finding it very difficult to afford to go to college, and they're leaving school $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 in debt. Pell Grant program provides assistance to over 7 million low-income young people in this country. Can you guarantee to us, if you are made a Secretary of Education, that no student in America will lose their Pell Grant as the department is dismantled?
Certainly, the defunding is not the goal here. The continuation of Pell Grants, I'd actually even like to see an expansion of Pell Grants. I'd like to see short-term certificates for Pell Grants for students who aren't going on to four-year universities, who could have the opportunity to use Pell Grants for skill-based learning.
All right, so what I'm hearing you say is Pell Grant program will continue under your administration?
Yes.
Okay. Senator Cassidy asked you an important question, and that is, do you agree, and let me just once again get your feelings on this, that if there is a movement to abolish the Department of Education, it has to go through the United States Congress?
Yes, it is set up by the United States Congress, and we work with Congress. It clearly cannot be shut down without it.
Thank you, Ms. McMahon. Elon Musk's DOGE staffers have reportedly set up camp at the Department of Education. They've already been given access to highly sensitive student data and have already started holding back money that Congress decided on a bipartisan basis was needed to help our schools and students. We're also hearing, as you know, about an executive order coming any day that will seek to dismantle the Department of Education. These are bipartisan laws. You indicated that you understood that Congress has passed these laws. But a lot of turmoil is happening. You heard it from my colleague just asking that question now. So I want to ask you, if confirmed, do you commit to getting every dollar we have invested in our students and schools out to them?
Well, the appropriated dollars and those monies that are passed by Congress, yes. I have no issue, however, with the fact, and I believe the American people spoke loudly in the election last November to say that they want to look at waste, fraud, and abuse in our government. So DOGE, there are a couple of implants at the Department of Education, as there are with agencies throughout the district, and they're doing an audit.
Right,
you know,
I understand an audit, but when Congress appropriates money, it is the administration's responsibility to put that out as directed by Congress, who has the power of the purse. So what will you do if the president or Elon Musk tells you not to spend money Congress has appropriated to you?
We will certainly expend those dollars that Congress has passed, but I do think it is worthwhile to take a look at the programs before money goes out the door. It's much easier. It is much easier to stop the money as it's going out the door than it is to claw it back.
The process by law is that you look at that, you make recommendations to Congress, and we implement those laws. So, I mean, the question really is, who decides how much federal funding public schools get in Seattle, where it's already been allocated? The school district or Elon Musk or Congress? And I think Congress has been pretty clear that the purse lies here. We pass our appropriations bills. We expect those programs to come. If you have input, if you have programs you have looked at that you believe are not effective, then it is your job to come to us, explain why, and get the support for that. Let me move on. Ms. Mann, I believe that our nation's students, families, and taxpayers do want true accountability. They do want improvement in our schools. Back in 2015, Congress came together in a bipartisan way to replace the No Child Left Behind Act with the new law, Every Student Succeeds Act. That was a bill I was very proud to negotiate with my Republican counterpart on this committee, passed it into law. It gives states more flexibility in using their federal education funds. It eliminated those one-size-fits-all mandates that everyone hated, and it established some really strong federal guardrails to hold states and schools accountable. I believe that the Department of Education must do more to implement that law. Right now, less than 42% of our schools identified for comprehensive support and improvement, or CSI as we call it, had a plan that met all the requirements of that law. And 1 in 5 schools' plans included practices we know are ineffective. National assessment results, as you well know, released a few weeks ago, show that our lowest performing students continue to fall furthest behind. So I want to ask you, what specific actions will you take to implement the ESSA law? I'm not looking for an exhaustive list, but can you name a couple of the requirements that are in that law that you will make sure are implemented?
Well, Senator, thank you, and I would look forward to working with you in the committee, understanding more about the ESSA laws.
Do you know what the requirements are? Do you know about the requirements for targeted support improvement schools or the annual report card requirement? Can you name any of the requirements that are in that?
Yes, I have read through ESSA, and I do know, it's very interesting. It's how I really got into education in the first place, was when No Child Left Behind was in place.
But there are no requirements that you can tell me right now that you will make sure, as Secretary of Education, you will implement?
No, I want to study it further and get back to you with that, and I'll be happy to do that.
Okay. Well, let me ask one last question. as I mentioned, DOJ staff have been given access in the Department of Education to personal information of students and families, like their social security numbers and their driver's license numbers and their date of birth, what college they're enrolled in. I know that the access has been temporarily paused due to litigation, but there is a real potential for that kind of information to be abused or for students' privacy to be placed in jeopardy if the courts end up ruling against the students. And we know that DOJ could use that highly personal information to then target students and target their families or cut off access to Pell Grants for students at college that someone perceives opposes maybe President Trump policy. So I want to ask you, do you believe that DOJ employees should have access to private student data?
It is my understanding that DOJ employees have been onboarded as employees of the Department of Education, and therefore they operate under the restraints of utilizing access of information, and they are constrained by that.
That is not our understanding, and I have to tell
That's
you,
my
it's
understanding.
deeply concerning that we have DOJ staffers, we don't know who they are, they're not held accountable, getting access to students' private information. I think that should frighten everyone.
Well, again, I'm not there
Thank you,
yet.
Madam Chair.
So I'm not there yet, but it is my understanding that they are onboarded fully
I hope
employees.
if you do get there that you make sure that students' private information is not given to someone who's no idea what they have, or we have no idea how they're using it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I start my questions, just wanted to put some studies in the record. Recent research studies of private school vouchers in Louisiana, Indiana, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. showed that students who used these vouchers performed worse academically than their public school peers. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record those 4 studies that show private school vouchers have a negative impact on student achievement.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. McMahon, I appreciated the opportunity to meet with you last month, and I believe in giving all the president's nominees a fair shake. That's what the people of Wisconsin expect from me, and I look forward to hearing more about your approach to running the Department of Education if confirmed. Mrs. McMahon, since 1972, Title IX has been a critical tool in ensuring that all students are protected from sex-based discrimination in federally funded education programs. We briefly discussed Title IX in our meeting, but I'd like to ask you a series of yes or no questions to get into a little bit more detail here. So yes or no, do you believe that Title IX should be enforced to protect students from sexual harassment and sexual assault?
Yes, I do.
Do you believe that sexual harassment that is severe should be prohibited under Title IX?
I think sexual harassment should be prohibited in any case.
Thank you. Do you believe that sexual harassment that is pervasive should be prohibited by Title IX?
Yes.
Do you believe that harassment that is either severe or pervasive should be prohibited under Title IX?
I don't believe there should be any acceptance of sexual harassment, Senator.
Great. Because I'm glad you actually agree with President Trump's efforts during his first term to narrow what qualifies as sexual harassment under Title IX. His guidance said that sexual harassment had to be severe and pervasive. And I hope that you will take your position and press for that to be the law. But right now, the Title IX is limited to sexual harassment that is severe and pervasive, not severe or pervasive. Yes or no, if an assault occurs between 2 students, but it happens off campus, do you think the school should have the ability to investigate that matter?
I think the school should investigate that matter, and I believe under the regulations today, and I could be corrected on that, that they are obligated to investigate.
Okay, and do you believe that the school then, after investigation, should have the ability to take actions regarding an incident that occurs off campus?
Yes, I think the school should be required to take those actions and to investigate and to notify the parties that are involved, and that so that both sides of the equation can have due process.
I appreciate your answer. It is not entirely clear at this matter, at this time, that the incidents would not only be investigated but adjudicated as to the school's adjudication rules. And the problem with that, as I'm sure you're well aware, is that you would have the potential of a victim of sexual assault facing the potential of attending class with their perpetrator. You know, despite how much this administration likes to talk about protecting women and girls, the actions have not matched the rhetoric. And so I think instead of actually protecting women and girls, this administration is not making school a safer place for anyone, while using this topic as a way to fearmonger and demonize others. Mrs. McMahon, you have been named in a lawsuit which alleges that you and your husband allowed for systemic and pervasive abuse of underage children to persist in your business for years. It is an ongoing lawsuit, and it alleges that you rehired a known sexual predator and you felt it was sufficient to simply direct him to steer clear of children. If confirmed, you will be responsible with overseeing the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, charged with ensuring equal access to education through vigorous enforcement of civil rights laws. I am so concerned about whether sexual assault survivors on campus can trust you to support them.
Thank you, Senator. They certainly can trust me to support them. I have a granddaughter that is now in college. I have 2 grandsons who are in college. And I have a deep commitment of understanding of how I would feel if any of them were involved in sexual harassment or accused of sexual harassment. You have my absolute commitment that I will uphold and protect those investigations to make sure that those students are treated fairly on both sides.
I want to talk to you about an executive order that the Trump administration issued that commands agencies, including the Department of Education, to eliminate grants to organizations and entities that support DEI programs and activities. As you know, this has a lot of schools all across the country scrambling because they have no idea what that means. They don't know because the order doesn't define DEI as to whether they are in compliance or out of compliance and whether they are going to have their federal grants compromised. How does a school know whether it's running a DEI program or not?
Well, certainly, and thank you, Senator, and it is good to see you again outside of the state of Connecticut, where we run into each other. DEI, I think, has been, it's a program that's tough. It was put in place ostensibly for more diversity, for equity and inclusion, and I think what we're seeing is that it's having an opposite effect. We are getting back to more segregating of our schools instead of having more inclusion in our schools. When there are DEI programs that say that Black students need separate graduation ceremonies or Hispanics need separate ceremonies, we are not achieving what we wanted to achieve with inclusion.
Let me give you an example then. So this order applies to Department of Defense schools, and those schools have canceled all programming around Black History Month. So if a school in Connecticut celebrates Martin Luther King Day and has a series of events and programming teaching about Black history, are they in violation of a policy that says schools should stop running DEI programs?
Not in my view. That is clearly not the case. That celebration of Martin Luther King Day and Black History Month should be celebrated throughout all of our schools. I believe that Martin Luther King was one of the strongest proponents of making sure that we look at all of our populations. When he said that, he would hope that his children wouldn't be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And I think that is the fundamental basis that we should celebrate Black History Month.
West Point has closed down all ethnic clubs, so the Society of Black Engineers no longer can meet because they believe that to be in compliance with this order, they cannot have groups structured around ethnic or racial affiliations. Would schools, would public schools be in violation of this order? Would they risk funding if they had clubs that students could belong to based on their racial or ethnic identity?
Well, I certainly today don't want to address, hypothetical situations. I would like, once I'm confirmed, to get in and assess these programs, look at what has been covered.
Is that a pretty easy one? I mean, you're saying that it's a possibility that if a school has a club for Vietnamese American students or Black students where they meet after school, that they could be potentially in jeopardy of receiving federal funding?
Again, I would like to fully what order is and what those clubs are doing.
That's pretty chilling. I think schools all around the country are going to hear that. What about educational programming centered around specific ethnic and racial experiences? My son is in a public school. He takes a class called African American History. If you're running an African American history class, could you perhaps be in violation of this court order, of this executive order?
I'm not quite certain, and I'd like to look into it further and get back to you on that.
So there's a possibility, you're saying, that public schools that run African American history classes, right? This is a class that has been taught in public schools for decades, could lose federal funding if they continue to teach African American history.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I would like to take a look at these programs and fully understand the breadth of the executive order and get back to you on that.
I think you're going to have a lot of educators and a lot of principals and administrators scrambling right now.
I want to ask you about public service loan forgiveness. The federal public service loan forgiveness program was put in place during the Bush administration, bipartisan Congress. It's been part of law since 2007. What is your position on public service loan forgiveness program?
Well, certainly, and thank you very much, and it was good to visit with you in your office, Senator. Clearly, there are programs that have already been passed by Congress that do, in fact, grant loan forgiveness for public service. Our first responders, military, et cetera. And we certainly should honor those programs. And if we want stronger or more programs for loan forgiveness, then I think Congress should pass those programs and then we would implement it.
So your commitment is, should you be confirmed, you will fully implement existing public service loan forgiveness programs that have been passed by Congress?
Those that have been passed by Congress, yes, that's the law.
That's very important because during the first Trump administration, Secretary DeVos and the Department of Education slow-walked approvals of public service loan forgiveness. 7,000 people over the course of 4 years were granted forgiveness under the programs. It was about a 3% acceptance rate of fully qualified applicants for public service loan forgiveness. During the Biden administration, more than 1 million applicants were approved for forgiveness, as was appropriate given the congressional directive, and more than 33,000 Virginia public servants were given public service loan forgiveness. If the Doge brothers or somebody else tells you we don't like these programs and we don't want you to implement them, I can count on you to stand up and fully implement them to benefit those who are entitled to the benefit by the congressional statute.
Yes, because that's the law.
Thank you for that. If there's no Department of Education, who will enforce the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act?
Well, I think that is something that I would very much like to understand more and look into. I mean, when IDEA was originally set up, it was under HEW, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. After the Department of Education was established in 1980, it shifted over there. I'm not sure that it's not better served in HHS, but I don't know. I haven't yet been able to be in, and if I'm confirmed, it is of high priority to make sure that the students who are receiving disability loans, disability funding, that is not impacted. It is incredibly important that those programs continue to be funded.
My Virginia parents who have children with disabilities are highly, highly worried right now about the elimination of the Department of Education. Because the IDEA is about funding, and I know you've talked about that already, but it's also about enforcement. You would agree with me that there has to be vigorous enforcement of the requirements of IDEA.
Well, I certainly agree that we want to make sure that that funding gets to those students, and it's not defunding.
I'm not asking about funding. I'm asking about enforcement of the
yes,
provisions.
the programs have to have accountability. All the programs do.
What role do you think the federal government should play in addressing the national teacher shortage?
Well, boy, that is a really critical issue, that we're not attracting and keeping our teachers. One thing I think we need to make sure of, and I'm not sure it's a federal government policy, because that really should be at the state level. How are we educating and teaching and training our teachers? How are we making sure that they have the supplies that they need in their classrooms? We need to make sure that the funding is proper in the states so that they can support teachers.
Let me say a word about funding. Just in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration, here's what they have done with respect to the teacher shortage. They've canceled grants going to jurisdictions, including jurisdictions in Virginia, on teacher training programs that have been designed to reduce teacher shortages. There's also a national priority that I'm sure you're familiar with, national board certification for teachers. It's kind of giving teachers the ability to sort of up their professional credentials, and often local governments and occasionally the federal government will give an incentive, a financial incentive for upping your credentials. The Trump administration canceled the grant that goes to the organization that administers national teacher certification. I get it that the primary responsibility for dealing with teacher shortages is at the state and local level. But the federal government has played an important role in this, and there are important ongoing initiatives to help states deal with it that this administration is canceling, suggesting that they don't really prioritize having highly qualified teachers standing up in front of every classroom.
I've been starting these hearings with a question I never thought I'd have to ask, and I'll cut to the chase with you because you've said several times that you will uphold the law, so I assume that if the President of the United States gives you a directive that breaks the law, you will instead do what you are legally required to do rather than his instruction.
The President will not ask me to do anything that is against the law.
Well, the last month has told us that it is quite likely he may, but I am going to take you at your word that you will enforce the law because you've said it several times today. 3 weeks ago, the President unilaterally cut all federal grants by issuing an indefinite freeze. That's an unconstitutional and, yes, illegal action that was stopped by federal courts, to my previous point. Subsequent reporting indicates that the President is also planning to eliminate the Department of Education. The department that you're interviewing today to lead. And there's this little bit of, the whole hearing right now feels kind of surreal to me. It's almost like we're being subjected to a very elegant gaslighting here. Because Senator Hawley just asked you, and you talked about the need to enforce protections for Jewish students on college campuses, but the very department where the enforcement would take place is the Department of Education, and he wants to eliminate it, and you say you will work with him to do that. Similarly, you've talked about the importance of apprenticeships and other kinds of career and technical education, really important. There's bipartisan support for that here. The Republicans are in charge. We have bipartisan bill after bipartisan bill. We could go right forward with it, but there's this discussion as if we haven't made any progress on that, and there's somehow a partisan divide about that. So I'd encourage you to look into that. But I want to talk a little bit about why the Department of Education is so important. It plays a critical role in making sure that students, regardless of their zip code, race, gender, disability, or family circumstance, have access to a quality public education. It was established because Congress recognized that the country has a compelling interest in ensuring that all of our kids become self-sufficient members of our workforce and our civil society. New Hampshire schools rely on federal funding of about $2,000 per student to provide that public education. What would you say to parents in my state who are concerned about the president's attempt to cut all federal funding to New Hampshire and to eliminate the Department of Education? Are you telling parents that their children should lose access to special education services, for example, or lose access to trained teachers or school nurses?
Well, thank you, Senator, very much. Let me just object to one point, and that is that, the residents in the state of New Hampshire should not be concerned that federal funding is going to be removed from their schools. How they get that federal funding may change.
My time is limited. What department do you suggest would then administer that funding?
Which funding?
The special education funding.
Special education, I think it could very well go back to HHS, where it started.
All right, so I just want to be clear, you're going to put special education in the hands of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, I want to talk about IDEA a little bit more. I want to turn to a specific issue regarding the president's plan to eliminate the Department of Education. What does the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act promise?
It promises that we're going to take care of these students, that they're going to be provided with assistance that they have in the schoolrooms, the technology that they need, the assistance. And you and I talked a little bit about that with your own child.
IDEA guarantees children with disabilities a free, appropriate education. What is the federal investment promised to states under IDEA? What's it supposed to be?
In terms of dollar amounts?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
The federal government committed back in 1975 when it passed IDEA to pay 40% of the average per pupil expenditure for special education. You know what the federal government actually does?
I think it's around 14 to 18% at this point.
It's about 15%.
But it's an appropriated amount from Congress, though, and so Congress needs to appropriate those dollars to spend.
That's right, but the President of the United States is proposing, and the Republicans in Congress are proposing massive tax cuts for billionaires, and they're trying to pay for it by massive cuts to education and other services. And just so you know, New Hampshire would lose $60 million in IDEA funding if IDEA were eliminated. My time is almost up. I'm just going to say this. The reason the Department of Education came about in about 1975, IDEA was passed in 1975. 1979 was the department. And Mr. Chair, I'll take just a second here. But people need to understand, people like my son, we talked about him. Before IDEA, before the Department of Education existed, state and local schools did not educate these kids. They barred them from the classrooms. These kids were institutionalized and abused. There is a reason that a Department of Education and IDEA exists, and it is because educating kids with disabilities can be really hard. And it takes the national commitment to get it done. And that's why so many people are so concerned about this proposal to eliminate the department, because they think kids will once again be shoved aside, and especially kids with disabilities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You know, as I'm sitting here watching the passion of the participants, of the members, it is clear that education is so important to this country. And I am clear-eyed about the challenges that we face in accomplishing the goal of ensuring that all students are able to be prioritized. I shared my concerns about the call to abolish the department. I am particularly concerned, as a former cabinet secretary myself, cabinet secretaries do have the influence, the power, the responsibility to share what is good, what is bad, what is wrong. And so I understand waiting until you get into a position to figure some things out, but there are core basic things like, do we have the confusion that people have over this executive order on diversity? They are scared. The fact that school kids are afraid to come to school, maybe because of their status, we're hearing all kinds of stories, and that's why this hearing is so important. That's why this position is so important. And I'm just a little confused because part of the reason why it was created was because in HEW, children were buried into these big departments. Why do you think that a department that is focused and that really is dealing with children, whether it's civil rights, disability, providing the checks and balances, why do you think that it is better to stick the functions of dealing with children with disabilities in a huge department that will not have the same priority?
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. The bottom line is because it's not working. Department of Education was set up in 1980, and since that time we have spent almost $1 trillion, and we have watched our performance scores continue to go down. I do believe that it is a responsibility to make sure that our children do have equal access to excellent education. I think that that is best handled at the state level, closest to the states, working with state administrators, teachers, parents, who should have input into their curriculum.
I have only 2 minutes, and I just want to follow up. Do you believe that any school benefiting from taxpayer dollars should be required to follow federal civil rights laws?
Schools should be required to follow the laws.
Anybody getting taxpayer dollars. And so that's good. So private schools should not be able to turn away a student with a disability or a student based on their religion or their ethnicity or race.
Well, private schools aren't taking federal dollars.
But I'm saying,
so they have the ability to say that if they do not believe that they
receive them.
Well, if they believe that they cannot best serve that student and they're not taking federal dollars, then they have the right not to accept that student.
But I'm speaking specifically when we talk about, there's a lot of conversation about vouchers. If private schools take federal dollars, can they turn away a child based on a disability or religion or race?
Well, I think that there are also some public schools who are saying that they don't have the...
Really just a yes or no?
No, it's not. It really isn't.
For me, if you want to follow up, because I'm kind of running out of time.
Okay, I'd be happy to follow, and I'd look forward to following up with you to discuss that. Thank you very much.
Okay, because this is one of the big concerns that we hear about. Also, I believe that as a country, as I said, we've benefited from checks and balances. It's a hallmark. If you're concerned, how would you defend the rights of all students if state and local governments are unable or won't address violations of students' civil rights? For example, how will you intervene if a student is being bullied or harassed on the basis of race or disability?
Well, certainly civil rights, are the rights of everyone. And so we'd want to make sure that our schools are enforcing. The bullying shouldn't happen anywhere. No child should be made to feel uncomfortable. So it is, but the Department of Education does not control that from Washington.
Would you put this in the department? When we talked, you mentioned the Department of Justice. Would you move this to the Department of Justice?
Well, one of the things that we talked about, as I said this morning, that I think there may be more appropriate places that maybe the Department OCR that is currently in the Department of Education is better served in the Department of Justice, where they have civil rights attorneys as well. But I don't know those things yet. If I'm confirmed, I look forward to getting in and really digesting and understanding where all of these particular aspects need to fit to best serve our students. That's the goal. It's to protect our students.
I look forward to following up. You can understand there is a lot of distrust based on people's motivations in just the past few weeks. I think that's why you're seeing all of what you've seen in this audience today in terms of participation of the folks here. This is important. Our students are important, as you know. And so I really hope that this administration and that you will recognize that there are students, there are teachers, there are parents that need the support and the help. And we hope that you will continue as well with your support of HBCUs.
Yesterday, President Trump said he'd like the Department of Education to be closed immediately. He called the department a big con job. Education funding helps us work towards a country where every student can go to their school knowing that they will get the same education as the family that can afford private school. Public school is not a con job. It's equality for every student. regardless of income. It helps guarantee that every student, including the 26 million low-income students, the 10 million rural, 5 million English language learners, 7 million disabled students, and 1 million homeless can go to public school knowing they have the same opportunity as every other student. Trump's crusade to abolish the Department of Education and, quote, root out waste and fraud and corruption for cuts to public schools is an attack on every public school student, parent, teacher, paraprofessional, administrator, and school worker in this country. Waste, fraud, and corruption is code for cuts to public education for all of those students. So I have here the text of a bill I've been working on, the No Cuts to Public Schools Act. This bill would guarantee that federal funding to public schools could not be cut during the length of President Trump's administration. Ms. McMahon, can you commit today to not cutting funding for public schools in this country?
Well, certainly what I'll commit to, sir, is that funding for schools is appropriated by Congress. And that funding should continue. Congress will continue to pass those laws. The Department of Education is not doing that.
So will you support, will you oppose any cuts to public education? Yes or no?
Well, the president is not saying that we should cut funding to public education.
Yes, he is.
He is
Yes,
simply
he is.
saying, well, I would disagree with you there.
Elon Musk yesterday announced he would immediately cut $900 million from the Department of Education. And he stood right next to Trump and made that very clear. So the answer I'm looking for, by the way, is a yes. I will fight to make sure that public funding is not cut, because that announcement was just made, the $900 million cut, and we know that's just a down payment to gut the education of every public school student in America. And by the way, to find the billions of dollars that are going to be needed for the tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires in our country, they have to go to the Department of Education, they have to go to clean air and clean water, they have to go to Medicaid, they have to go to the Affordable Care Act, they have to go to all of the programs that they are calling waste, fraud, and corruption, but that's just another way of saying the programs that help the poor and the sick and the elderly, the disabled in our society. That's what we are talking about, because they want all of these programs gutted to find the funding for the tax breaks. So DOGE, as it's rumbling through the Department of Education right now, just stands for Department of Gutting Education. That's what they're doing. They're inside looking at it. $900 billion is the down payment. So, Ms. McMahon, can you commit today to fight so that not $1 from public schools goes towards paying for tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires?
Well, that was certainly a broad view of what is going on right now today with trying to find waste, fraud, and abuse. Those groups that are in the Department of Education, from my understanding, have looked at competitive contracts that are bidding, and let's see where that money's going. How's it being spent? I'm not there. If I may, Senator,
what they're doing,
you've asked me a question. I would really like the opportunity to answer.
What they're doing is, first, they announce the cuts, then they go to find where it is. So it's all backwards, and again, we know what the plot is. And ultimately, the answer I'm looking for is a yes, because if even $1 flows away from an educator or a student towards a billionaire tax break, that will be immoral in our country. Immoral. These kids deserve the funding which they are receiving. And Donald Trump and Elon Musk should be ashamed that they are working harder for billionaires than they are for working families, for these kids who need help. 90% of disabled of students go to public schools. 95% of students with disabilities go to public schools. And Trump and Musk want to take from those students to give to billionaires. That is immoral. It's wrong. It's unjust, and we're going to fight it every single step of the way.
I guess I just wanted to jump in. I've heard a couple times you mentioned that you believe that Congress would need to be involved if there is an effort to abolish the Department of Education. That's right?
Correct.
Do you know if President Trump shares that sentiment?
I've heard President Trump recently, over the last couple of weeks, in conjunction with his fervor to shut down the bureaucracy of the Department of Education, he has also stated that he will work with Congress to make that happen.
Do you know if Elon Musk, have you had any conversations with him about the Department of Education? Him
I have
or
not.
his team? Why I raise this is that, I just came from another hearing that was talking about foreign assistance, talking about USAID. USAID is another element of our federal government that was codified by Congress, and we see an effort there to dismantle it. Not fully abolish it, but dismantle it basically down to about 600 people. Gut everything, put it under the State Department. So I guess I wanted to just ask you, if something like that was proposed by the Trump administration for the Department of Education, does that have to come to Congress?
Certainly, there are departments that I believe that are in the Department of Education by statute, and those have to be looked at.
And
Could they be moved?
what elements of the Department of Education are those that are protected by statute?
I believe IDEA is. I think Title I is. And I'd like to discuss that, look into it and discuss it more fully with you.
But for those that are not codified by statute, you're saying those are ones that the executive branch can do as they please? I
think that I would like to look into that more.
Why I kind of mentioned this as well is that, just in the first couple of weeks here, we had a lot of conversation about the surge of anti-Semitism, our strong support and making sure we're protecting students from that type of harassment, from that type of intimidation. Absolutely something we need to stand against in terms of anti-Semitism. But I guess I was alarmed because what we ended up seeing is that multiple attorneys and other staff members of the department's Office of Civil Rights have been placed on administrative leave with no notice, no explanation. And some of them were in the process of investigating cases directly related to anti-Semitic harassment. So I guess I wanted to just ask you, is that something you would support? Do you think that that's the right actions that we should be taking at this time that we see such a surge in anti-Semitism?
Well, Senator Kim, I know it's not a great comfort for me to say this morning that I am not yet confirmed and have not yet been in the department. I don't know about all the administrative people that have been put on leave. I want to look into that. I want to understand it. I want to assess the department. I can't do that unless I'm confirmed and I get there, but I would certainly be willing to come back to you with a more specific answer.
But does that concern you at all if you were confirmed? Would you make that a priority to go and see whether or not this is going to impact our ability to respond to anti-Semitism?
No, I would want to make sure that we have everything that we need to have in place to protect our students on campuses.
One thing that we have been having this debate on here in Congress is about this, and what we've seen is that Republicans have called for a 25% cut in the budget of the Office of Civil Rights. Is that something you would support?
I would want to see exactly what that impact is going to be and understand it.
Look, I guess I'm frustrated because I feel like this is such a clear place where we can just say, yes, we want to make sure we have as much resources as possible to be able to fight anti-Semitism, to make sure that we're addressing these needs of such a surge. When we see a surge in anti-Semitism, of course we would want a surge in resources to focus on that. So I just wanted to raise that because this whole debate that we're having right now, it feels like it's untethered from just the reality on the ground. And I just urge you, if you are confirmed, that we are understanding the human impact of the problems that are here. I have a second grader and a fourth grader. I got two little boys. And I just had their parent-teacher conference. And yes, we talked through the performance of my kids, the data that NAEP and others are used, the Institute for Education Sciences. Now we're seeing $900 million cuts to that coming out from Elon Musk and his team. But I just raised this is the reason why teachers are concerned right now is not about their own salaries and their own careers. When they talk to me, they talk about the kids. They talk about the kids. That's I find that to be so powerful when these teachers, they're saying, look, I'm not asking about my own career. I'm asking about the kids. So just as you proceed, just remember that. Parents are very scared right now.
The question I have for you today, I know your parents were civil servants, and so you recognize the importance that they bring to their work, the care and concern that they bring to their work. And I have been very concerned regarding the treatment of many of our civil servants, those especially in the Department of Education. You may know that last night a number of them were laid off with 15 minutes to have their computers turned off, access to it, just treated really horribly. So the question I have for you, because one of my constituents on a town hall I hosted last night with 17,000 Marylanders said that they are working in a culture of fear at the department, and that civil servants at the department don't know who will be fired next, have little guidance, and feel like they can't do their jobs, and they care very much about the work they're doing. So how will you address the culture of fear in an environment where civil servants, both Democrats and Republicans, who are working there, are feeling undervalued and attacked by this administration?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Senator. And it's always difficult to downsize. It's always difficult to restructure and reorganize in any department. I have faced that, in the business world, because you know that you do impact people's lives. But at this particular point, I know that there are people that are being placed on administrative leave, which means they are still receiving full benefits and salary while their jobs are being looked at and how the department is being evaluated overall. I think people should always be treated with respect and with humility. And I would hope that that is what is going on within the Department of Education. I'm not there in person to see that yet, but it was certainly something that I would strive to do in any reorganization that we would take.
Okay, and I'd also like to ask you regarding the president's targeting of legally binding collective bargaining agreements. He has really targeted those, to ask you whether you will commit to abiding by the agreement and upholding civil service employment protections.
I will certainly commit to working with you and to looking into those issues if I am confirmed to be the Secretary of Education.
And also to ask you whether you will commit to ensuring that federal workers with disabilities, many of them are very concerned about whether they will continue to have reasonable accommodations as required by law.
Well, as required by law is the key phrase there, yes.
Okay, well, in the same vein, there are some who are concerned about being forced now to reapply for accommodations. These are people who have had those accommodations given to them, and they're being told now that they must reapply for those accommodations with their supervisors. And so will you commit that the department civil servants with disabilities will have their reasonable accommodations honored without interference or delay?
I'll certainly commit, if I'm there and confirmed, to look into all of those and to get back to you.
Okay. And finally, I'd like to ask you regarding the freezing of funds. If you are confirmed, would you support any directive from the president to freeze funds that have been appropriated by Congress, including funds that students and families rely on to pay for college?
If they've been appropriated by Congress, those funds should be disseminated.
Okay, and so you would block any directive. You would not adhere to any directive, including some of our HBCUs in my state, Bowie, Coppin State, Morgan State. You would not interfere with the freezing of those funds.
I commit to you that I will look into every single one of those programs so that I can get back to you and say, this is what I've found, this is what I've discovered, this is what the action is being taken against it or in favor of it, because I'd want to be very inclusive with you on that regard.
Okay, the final question, I just have 9 seconds here. Title I, I know that you said you support it. If the Department of Education is dismantled, what will you do to protect the students who are disadvantaged and impoverished on Title I funds?
Well, Title I funds are appropriated by Congress. They flow directly to the states today. They go to the State Department of Education, then they're deployed to the districts. So the Department of Education is not really involved in that distribution.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Also Brooks. Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 18 letters opposing Ms. McCann as Secretary of Education.
So ordered.